welcome everybody here in actual Galway, and welcome everybody online. It's a pleasure to be here. So as Turno said, I am an ESG advisor. I work in that area for over 20 years. I am also a consultant for Accelerate Green, which some of you might know. And I'm a big fan of innovation and startups because I think you're desperately needed to solve all the major problems we're facing in the world. But I believe that ESG should really be strategic for you right now for your business strategy. So not a little sideshow, but it should actually become part of the main show. Our agenda for today. So we're going to speak about the wider context. Why does ESG matter for your business? And then we're going to apply the context, what actually matters to you, because ESG is such a wide area and not everything is always material to every company in every sector. And then the third one might actually be the most important is, what are they actually going to ask for? So I work also with investors. I'm the senior ESG advisor for Atlantic Bridge. Some of you might know this particular investment fund. And then we also have a real world example. So you can see what other companies at startup stage or a little bit later stage, what are they actually doing? What are they planning to do? And then I have a few little hints of how you can actually get active. So with no further ado, we're going to just jump into the first section. So some of you might know this. This is a risk rating from the World Economic Forum, held in Davos once a year. And they always ask all the participants, so these are the world-leading companies, world-leading investors, politicians, and so forth. It's a very high-level forum. I usually go there myself, and they ask the participants of what you see the main risks coming down the road with a 2-year and a 10-year horizon. And what's interesting here is that in the short-term horizon, you can see misinformation, disinformation really tops everything. That was probably that was the top subject of discussion in January. But then the second one, extreme weather events, is following close behind. But then if you look at the 10-year horizon, you can see that other climate and nature themes are the top 4 risks. So we have climate change, we have biodiversity loss, and we have natural resource shortages. So I think it's really important because it sends a clear message that investors are hugely worried about the impacts of climate change and the loss of biodiversity. And if we now have a look at the actual biodiversity crisis, these are the latest numbers. So biodiversity in the world has declined by 73% since 1970. I always find that's a really shocking number. So I'll give you a few seconds to just take that in. And I was very lucky to attend the biodiversity COP in Colombia last month. And I met someone who said to me, well, we seem to be the same generation, 1970. Seems to be us who caused this. And it's not a joke. Obviously, some generations before us, but it's actually us causing this. And we're going to come to the question of how on earth does this matter to you? Well, it actually does. And so does this. Yeah, Turner already mentioned extreme weather events. We have them coming to Galway. So we have now we outperformed, so to speak, the target the world set at the Paris Climate COP in 2015. We said we're not going to overshoot. We're trying to not overshoot 1.5 to 2 degrees. 2024 will be the hottest year on record. And for the first time, we did overshoot 1.5 degrees. So that is severe. And obviously here in Ireland, it's not so much the drought and the fires and the heat waves, but it is indeed extreme weather events. So storms. And again, we're going to come to what does that matter? Why does that matter to you? So this is the world today. Why do extreme weather events matter? So here I've just picked 3 cases, and this all relates to the technology sector. Yeah? So we're not talking about the food sector or any irrelevant sector here today. So this could be medtech. So if you look at the floods in California, that caused a 20 to 30% decrease in shipments, where transportation systems were disrupted. Then we had Hurricane Helene, and that had an impact on quartz mining, yeah? Temporary closure of crucial high-quality pure quartz mine. And then another example is the drought in the Amazon basin. I don't know if you saw those pictures. Yeah? When the Amazon is drying, and that means the Amazon as a biodiversity system is no longer a carbon sink. It has started emitting carbon. Yeah? So these are all the tipping points we're reaching as a planet. And unfortunately, scientists so far have said this year that actually those tipping points, we're getting closer to them as expected. So I think from here on, we'll just have to prepare for extreme events. So let's just jump to the question of how does this relate to you? Why is ESG relevant? So we have a context, it's a changing world, a changing environment, but there are also some internal pressure points for your businesses. So number 1 question would be, to me, that's really at the heart, is what is the purpose of your business? Are you contributing to the problem? Are you doing harm? Are you not doing harm? I think it's a really important question as a founding team of a business to answer. In these days, it's absolutely crucial you have an answer. Then the next question would be, what's your impact business model? Are you driving positive impact for the world in some sense? You know, are you contributing to better health of people, some environmental solution? You have an impact business model. Are you able to speak about that? Are you able to articulate your impact value proposition for investors? Because lots of investors are now really interested in that type of topic. ESG and sustainability in general, linked to impact and purpose, is hugely important for staff recruitment and retainment. So if you're scaling up as a startup, you need to have answers to these questions. It's a huge point of attraction, especially for younger staff, because they don't want to work for companies with a negative impact or no strategy at all how to at least avoid a negative impact. And we're going to speak about that throughout. If you start early, your pressure points will decrease. If you're trying to retrofit ESG, it's more costly, more time consuming, and not as efficient. If we look at the external pressure points, we have all kinds of regulations in Europe. Europe is currently leading in the world. And I have confirmation of that in COP in Colombia. There was a lot of questions because obviously I came from Europe of, you know, how are we doing? How are we adopting to those regulations? Which ones would we recommend? So it's really interesting to know that Europe is leading indeed, and we are already beyond implementation. So these are not just far on the horizon, it is happening. We also have a lot of voluntary disclosure initiatives. I will show you some of these. Yes, they're voluntary, but voluntary sometimes is the precursor for mandatory. So it's good to know these frameworks. We have a lot of investors asking for ESG reporting. Again, I will show you some examples. It would astonish me in these days if any of your early investors are not going to send you either an ESG due diligence questionnaire or an ESG reporting questionnaire. So if you're not prepared for that, you'll have a problem. And then some of your clients might actually ask you some ESG questions. So all of these external pressure points are really important to know. I will now show you some of the regulations just to, let you see what are these regulations actually asking for. So this is a regulation called SFDR, which is the Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation. It is relevant to investors. So all investors in Europe automatically fall under this regulation. They can position themselves differently So you might have heard about an Article 8 or an Article 9 fund. So Article 8 is a light green fund, Article 9 is a dark green fund, and they have to fulfill different reporting and disclosure requests. Yeah. But obviously the whole purpose of SFDR, which I'm a big fan of this regulation, and I know lots of investors just find it a headache, but it was implemented to avoid greenwashing. Yeah? So lots of investors position themselves as ESG or sustainable or impact investors. If you looked under the hood, there wasn't much. Well, those times are coming to an end. But that means they will come to you and might ask some of these questions here. So those are what we call the principal adverse indicators. I've just marked the one in blue, which would be relevant for anything concerning the environment. This is what they have to report on, the investors, so they're going to come to you and ask you those questions. So it is indeed greenhouse gas emissions, what's your carbon footprint, what's your greenhouse gas intensity. They even go as far as asking if your business would affect biodiversity sensitive areas, which is brilliant because really that is the system thinking. And obviously emissions to water would play a big role for these questions. Then next, I'm going to show you what's happening in the world in terms of reporting standards for nature. So if you go to the very top, those are the UN initiatives. So there are international agreements. In the middle, we have the Paris Agreement, and then right next to it is the Global Biodiversity Framework. So they set at UN level goals for the world. Each country then needs to implement it. So Ireland will have an NDC, National Determined Contribution. That is the Climate Action Plan, but they also have a biodiversity, strategic biodiversity action plan. And that's a firm commitment. They have to be translated, these goals, and they will be translated to businesses. Under that, we have some very relevant voluntary frameworks. So we have the TCFD and we have the TNFD. Now, it might not mean much to you today, but it might come up in the future, and it's really important to know these things. Yeah? So TCFD is the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosure. So it asks companies to disclose information related to climate change, and TNFD is exactly the same for nature, which is brand new, but there's a lot of activity going on. So all the large companies are currently scrambling to get their nature data in place and to commit to nature positive strategies. I think that's really important to know. It's a big movement. Under that, we have corporate reporting standards. I'm not going to dive into that. You can look them up. There's many around. What is actually most important for Europe is the market regulation. As I said before, Europe is leading with that. And we have what's called the CSRD, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Disclosure Regulation. And I'm just going to show you, again, what are they asking for? Well, these are sector agnostic standards, but you can already see that they are actually very holistic. Yeah? So just for environment, we have climate change, pollution, water, marine resources, biodiversity ecosystem, and circular economy. I think it's brilliant. They worked with loads of stakeholders for years to arrive at this. And it's obviously only for large companies. It wouldn't concern you, but those larger companies might actually ask their suppliers, and those suppliers will ask their suppliers. So it will trickle down. And it's a discussion point for everyone, which I think is deeply necessary, because unless we start working in systems, we're not going to solve this crisis. Then there's another regulation which just came out, and don't worry, that's the last regulation I'm going to show you, but it is relevant. So it's the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive. And this is asking for another set of disclosure and responsible behavior from companies which regards their value chain. So they're going to be asked to uphold certain standards for human rights and environmental impacts. Now, unfortunately, it was watered down, this regulation. There was a lot of lobbying against it. Now it's really only concerning companies with over 1,000 employees and more than 400 50 million turnover. But I think this might again trickle down in supply chains. Now, just one word on this task force here, which I mentioned before. So this is all concerning nature-related disclosures. It's a set of guidance. The goal is to enable businesses and finances to integrate nature as a key theme in their decision-making processes. So as said before, they need to assess their impact on nature, and this is relevant for all businesses, in my opinion. You need to assess your impact on nature, and then you need to actually design a mitigation strategy. And I have an example how that works for you. But TNFD is a hot topic and was so definitely at the COP in Colombia. So I have a little discussion point here. Now, I don't know if we can do that with the audience, which is online. So I'd like to hear from you. You know, what do you think are your internal and external ESG pressure points for you today? So is there a way to invite the online audience, Carlo, or?
We can invite people to turn on their mics. It's possible to do that. I think there could be some restrictions on what they can do. Have a look.
Yeah.
Let me see. Can we get anybody? Can we get people with mics on? I just wonder if there's anybody in the audience there. If you can turn on your mic, and maybe if you want to, just so we can do a test. Is anybody there? People are a little bit reluctant, but
can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Okay.
I'm the
Liam, thanks for contributing.
There. No problem at all. Yeah, we can't. The chat is not open there.
Okay. So I'm just wondering if is there anything you want to say just in terms of your mic, maybe to get a conversation going?
Yeah. Well, I suppose look, I'm on staff here in ATU, so I think the private sector and the public sector have, I suppose, slightly differing goals, I suppose, when it comes to ESG targets. So in terms of pressure points, I suppose the students are our currency. So, I mean, we need to devise strategies to I suppose, attract in our students to the college, make it a more attractive offering. So I think there's a different methodology possibly there. Maybe Maria might be able to comment.
It's an interesting one, all right. Just in terms of, I suppose, for some of the audience members, for those, like everybody, I think has a role to play in terms of environmental sustainability goals, whether it's things like water usage or waste management. There's so many different things that we can do ourselves, but just in terms of our own carbon footprint as well. Today we're running the event online, which means that people don't have to commute to attend the event. But like even still, running the event online, there's data centers that are that consume a lot of power, and maybe that has an impact in terms of how we even behave online. So in terms of the data centers themselves, like if they can use more renewables in terms of powering the data center, that can, I suppose, in some sense mitigate it. So I suppose everything that we do, just in terms of how we do our day-to-day business here in the Institute, there is an environmental impact on every little thing that we do. I think for a lot of people, maybe it's not something that you think about in your day-to-day, but I think, if you just look at the weather events and, as Martina mentioned, in terms of the biodiversity loss that's happening, like I live in a rural environment and I can see that in the rural environment, just in terms of I mentioned earlier, just in terms of the storm we had, it was 9-10 degrees, up to 13 degrees. And then 2 days, but the day previously it was -3 degrees. Like that's a major biological, adjustment for any type of an animal, that's outdoors to I suppose, just in terms of to survive in those types of conditions. I'd just be interested in seeing, is there any specific things, is there a personal kit or a guide in terms of ECGs that people can follow or adhere to as individuals?
Certainly, I mean, there's many apps I think you can use to, measure your personal carbon footprint or any other negative footprint. But I'm here to speak about businesses. So I am going to propose you some tools.
Yeah.
For sure. But I think what's most important, because you can't do everything as a business, even as ATU, it's impossible. You can try to, but that's going to make it inherently really complex. So you need to focus on what is material to your business.
Well, it's interesting because we have some businesses here, like there's a lot of medtech companies here, so a lot of the actual materials or the components that they use in their devices, it's quite difficult in terms of how they can actually be valorized or how they can be recycled. But we have one company here, Exemplary Medical, that got DTIF funding recently, and they received the funding due to the fact that the actual endoscope that they're developing, a lot of the components in that endoscope can be recycled.
Yeah.
So they're looking at, I suppose, the footprint and also in terms of the life cycle and how they can extend or how they can valorize that product, beyond its actual use itself. So that's probably, I suppose, a real life example that we have here in the Innovation Centre.
Yeah, that's a brilliant example. So I have actually a medtech example. That's part
Okay, great.
of my presentation, so we can look in detail of what they attempt to devise as their sustainability strategy. But maybe let's move on, unless there's any other questions. No. So if we move again now, Robert. No, I lost the.
It's the lost control of it.
Yeah.
It happens. Is it working there? Yeah. It's working there.
So it's
So you just click the little arrows here, yeah.
So this doesn't work.
Yeah, you can just click on that.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'd like to discuss this topic with you again. You might have heard it already. It was in the media. It's quite important to understand this concept, the concept of double materiality. So the whole overriding question is, as mentioned, is what it really matters to your business. And so the concept of double materiality looks at impact materiality. So that is actually your company's impact on people and the planet. But it also looks at what is called financial materiality. So that is the impact of the environment onto your business. So if, for example, regulation changes, if you have an extreme weather event, that is a financial materiality event for your business, because there is a financial impact which is out of your control unless you are prepared for it. But your company also has an impact on people and planet. So that's the kind of thinking you need to actually start with your sustainability strategy. So how does that link to you? I'd like to divide it into risk and opportunity. So one external risk, a change, might be an extreme weather event, which would actually result in a supply chain disruption for your business. Another one, which is more an internal risk, is a litigation case of an ex-employee. I know in Ireland that's currently quite restricted, but my husband is French, and I hear a lot about litigation cases recently in France. It's a different regulatory environment, but for startups in particular, that can destroy you. So that's why we haven't really spoken about diversity, equality, and inclusion. But unless you have a policy and really apply it, you're under risk. We also have the risk of rising material prices. Yeah, that's a no-brainer, and loads of other risks. Yeah? These are just examples. But then on the opportunity side, if you're really thinking about your positive impact, it might actually open new markets, new investors, a new type of branding. So ESG is not only about risk and negative impact. It's really important to include opportunity in the thinking. And that's why it should sit under your business strategy. So I'd like to talk about sustainable business strategies and not a sustainability strategy on the side. It needs to be part of your core business thinking. So again, if we can have a little discussion. So what is most material to you? How will ESG matter to you? What comes up immediately? Is there anybody from the audience? I can't see it, the online audience. Maybe that doesn't work. I'm not sure.
No, it's working, yes.
Yeah.
They just need to turn on their mics if they want to
Okay.
participate.
Yeah.
Anybody here in the audience?
Probably what will we be asked for and how do we like that information?
Yeah, we're going to come to that. That's the next chapter. Get investor ready. We're finally getting there.
Do you think as well, like there needs to be a cultural change within companies, because what really matters is how people think about this.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's why I do believe it should be part of any startup culture, because then you're really establishing that from the very beginning. Because if you're starting and sustainability is not on the table at all, then it's very difficult to retrofit it.
Yeah, I think so, yeah. We have a gentleman here who's on the New Frontiers program. It's a business startup program. Like in terms of your own business yourself, like what's your thing?
I'll be major users of data centers, but I have no visibility as to what is the carbon footprint associated with it. And I'm curious, actually, what is the state of the level of information provided by data centers themselves in terms of carbon footprint? Where would you get that information? I'm looking from the outside.
Yeah, so normally if you use a cloud service, especially from the bigger suppliers, they can give you that information. You can ask for it. What is the carbon footprint of my current usage of your data center? So I know for sure that Amazon would have that information as an example. Okay, well, let's dive into the core question. What are they going to ask for? So I'm going to show you the ESG framework of Atlantic Bridge, which is anyhow public on their website under their responsible investment policy. So you can see they have 12 themes, and it's quite wide. And I think what's really interesting is that under climate, they don't only have climate action, but they also have climate resilience, which is everything linked to what we just spoke about, actual physical climate risk and transition risk. We want to look at that. Circularity is very important to them. So that would be a question under due diligence. Have you thought about circularity? Another question which comes up under the environment is plastic pollution. You might know that the world is negotiating a plastic pollution treaty right now. It's another UN level negotiation. So it's quite important for companies to actually take this into account, have an answer. If it's not currently possible, okay, but you have thought about it. I think under the social arena, these are all the usual questions. Community engagement is probably not relevant for a startup, but at a later stage, it might be important, especially if you have a production site, stakeholder engagement. What is your relationship with the local community? And then the governance side, but business conduct and leadership. So that is all about ethics. How important does the business take ESG? Is there somebody on the board accountable? Is there somebody in the C-suite responsible actually for implementation? That's the biggest downfall of a lot of companies, that they have policies, but then nobody is accountable, nobody is responsible. Well, that's not going to work. Board composition, that's the usual suspect. A lot of companies, especially startups in particular sectors, are struggling to find women for boards. That always surprises me. And the answer is most of the time we can't find them. Well, we're here. So that's no longer the right answer. I can't emphasize more. You just have to search differently. That's it. And then, these go without saying. Data privacy, cybersecurity, certainly the medtech sector, that's hugely important. And then the last one, supply chain screening, and I'm going to come to that. Yeah. Now, this might look overwhelming, I'm pretty sure, but the good news is that they do this at different disclosure levels. So not every company, and certainly not from every industry, has to answer all these questions. Yeah. And I've obviously advised them not to do that because there's nothing worse than getting, 160 question ESG questionnaire, which anyway, you can only answer 20. What's the point? So if we look at another one here, so this is Invest Europe. It's the biggest venture capital private equity industry association in Europe. They have just published their latest standards yesterday. So reporting standards. And they have taken up different disclosure levels. So Atlantic Bridge was at the forefront of this, but now Invest Europe has actually embraced this, which I think is brilliant. Now, these are just nature-related questions at due diligence stage. Also brand new. I was delighted when I saw these, because the reporting standards currently don't cover these subjects. But they have climate risk in there. So I'm pretty sure next year in the reporting standard that will trickle down. It goes from due diligence into the reporting standard. And these are just some examples. Now, if you look at the last question, is the company considering the use of more environmentally friendly and safer raw materials, chemicals in the production process? That's quite a detailed question. And these are good questions to consider. You don't always need to have the perfect answer, but even just thinking about it is useful, in my opinion. Then we come to Enterprise Island. Now, this is their questionnaire from this year. I'm sure in January they will publish the new one, but it does have the usual questions. So climate strategy, your greenhouse gas emissions, scope 1, 2, and 3, and then some other questions. I think they have about 25 questions with no different disclosure levels. So it's the same questions, no matter what stage you are. Maybe they will adopt that. Okay. So how ready do you feel for ESG due diligence? What will it take, you think, to get ready? Maybe any, yeah, go ahead.
Fines. As people start getting fined or impacts their finance.
Yeah, well, I mean, you have different motivations, right, to take on ESG in your business. First of all, I think it's risk and opportunity, just business as usual. But then if you're looking into raising funds, then you're really underprepared if you don't know how to answer any of these questions. Because they will come, for sure. It's standard now. Is there anybody from the audience who'd like to pitch in from the online audience?
Is there two kits, or is there kind of an international standard in terms of that companies can adhere to try and, I suppose, when they come to this, that they can apply now, so they can use it as for an internal audit within their own company?
Yeah, there's a few you could look at. I would say Invest Europe, because it's the latest right now, and it's hopefully aligned also with the European Investment Fund, which is a limited partner in a lot of private equity and venture capital firms. I would recommend that.
Yeah. It's interesting because I was just looking at some of the European Innovation Council funding that's that's coming out, and there's another layer of funding which is really to help companies scale at pace. But I can see this is going to be a major component as part of the overall due diligence, and I don't know how well prepared startups are, because a lot of startups are underfunded. So there's so much regulatory requirement for startups. Is there going to be do you think the legal requirements down the line to have a sustainability officer the same way as you might have someone that's designated to be responsible for health and safety in the company? Or do you think that role will evolve to include sustainability?
I don't think that will apply for startups or, later stage companies. I think that will be sitting under CSRD, so for large companies. And I believe it doesn't take that many resources. So we're going to come to that to actually start. So you don't need a full-time person on sustainability. Actually, it's the last thing you need. You need to actually make it part of some of your existing roles.
Okay.
That's the best way. Yes?
Yes, Martina. So when we get ready access to data comes to mind. My question is there a kind of a platform that will allow suppliers to publish their carbon footprint so that, it is easily accessible if you yourself has to calculate your impact? Is there anything out there at the moment that will help people publish?
Yeah, well, that would be a dream, right? Not to my knowledge. Maybe somebody's working on that, but I don't think that exists. There are certain certificates which suppliers can attain, but really, I mean, the best way is to reach out to them and ask them, what information can you provide me on your sustainability practices? Do you have an environmental policy? Can you give me carbon data for the materials I'm ordering from you? Those should be standard questions. But it would be part of your carbon accounting. It's an actual method. So you could then, depending what sector you're in and what materials you're using, you can send those questions to your suppliers. It's a standard methodology which comes down from the greenhouse gas protocol. So suppliers, they should be prepared for it. And if they're not, well, then that's a discussion point. Okay, so maybe let's look at the real world example. So I chose a company from the medtech sector, so I thought that would be most appropriate here. And we might just jump immediately into the real example. I was going to have a discussion here, but I think it's a bit difficult with the online-offline model. So can't seem to move the slide. Yeah, okay. So I'm going to show you their ESG roadmap for the next 12 months. So it is a late stage startup. I can't give you the name. They're based in the UK. It's a medical device around the heart. They are pre-sales, so they're not actually producing yet, which makes it an interesting case. So we advise them on this, and they've adopted this ESG roadmap together with other investors. That's also the interesting case. Normally, it's not just one investor pushing for this, but it's an investor pool. So we wanted them to actually demonstrate climate action, and with that, for them to just kick off their carbon footprint. Now, some investors, they actually offer carbon footprint platforms to their portfolio companies. But otherwise, you would have to actually subscribe yourself to one of those platforms. I have some advice on that later, but that's actually the first step. And that's what this company is actually going to do. And they are going to find one existing staff member who will start with the carbon accounting, and they will be accountable for this process. Number two is make nature a key subject in your usual business discussions, but also in your boardroom, and see if there's any potential to reduce the negative impact. And that obviously, to your example, Turno, I mean, that will have to come into your design process. So their pre-production, obviously they have an existing product, proof of concept and so forth, but they can start the discussion now looking at the components of that device. Is there any potential if it's not now, maybe down the road, yeah? And just keep that as a key discussion point in all your strategic meetings. So if we carry on. So climate risk. This photo is actually from Galway. I think it was the December storm. Yeah, just a year ago, we had this severe storm here in Galway. We had at our house, we were without electricity, I think, for 4 days. So if you're a medtech company here in Galway and you're maybe planning your assembly here, even if it's not a production, but just the assembly line here in Galway, you have to have a plan for an extreme weather event. So that's how climate risk assessment looks like. It's not that complicated. So it wouldn't take an enormous amount of resources or time or money. Just think about the possibility. What are you going to do if you're without electricity? What are you going to do if your employees cannot make it to the production unit? That's all. But then you will have thought about climate risk and you have an actual answer to your investor. Now, if we go to the social section of ESG, they obviously don't have enough female participation at leadership level. I think their C-suite is entirely male, which is unfortunately in any tech sector still the case. It's astonishing, but it is still the case. So that's not good enough. And we recommended to them that they really have to either find internal candidates for promotion or look at externally. And that's the same for their board. They have an all-male board. That's just a big red flag in these days. Product safety, that goes without saying, but it is an ESG theme in the medtech sector. So if we come to the subject of governance, cyber risk, it's interesting how many startups or late startups, they don't really think about this. They don't have a policy. They don't really have an implementation plan. That's hugely important. Ethical business conduct, code of conduct, just to have that as a policy and then part of your later or existing employee handbook. Really important. Again, these are standard questions from any ESG questionnaire. So they failed on that. So we said you really have to work on that. Sustainability leadership is what I said before. You need to appoint leaders for sustainability. Otherwise, it's not going to work. Just having policies and they will end up in some drawers. Not good enough. For implementation, you need accountability. And then my last point here is recruit female board members. Another excuse is often, but our investors, they only propose male board members. Okay, well, maybe ask them, do you have a female board member? Can't be that difficult to ask that question, or just add another board member. It's possible. And then this is the last section of good preparation for an ESG roadmap. And it is the opportunity side, the positive side. Don't just focus on ESG as a, box ticking exercise, going into just compliance with a capital C. Think about your positive impact. Can you actually articulate your impact value proposition? And I think in the medtech sector, that's highly relevant. Again, you'd be surprised how many companies have some research somewhere. Yes, they have the proof of concept, but if you ask them in an elevator pitch mode, tell me about your impact value proposition, you can't. So I can't emphasize this enough because a lot of investors, and in particular investors under SFDR, Article 8 or 9, they are obliged to ask these questions. So you need to be prepared for it. So I have another example. I'm not sure we have time for that. And that is actually related to the area of AI. Yeah, so
I think
that might be interesting, no?
just on female representation, I'm happy to be able to report back on our last KPIs when we looked at our last metrics. One of the things that we track here is just in terms of female participation within our companies, within a lot of the companies that are here at the centre. And I think the standard kind of statistic is that 20% of people that work in STEM are female. Well, I can happily report it's about 36, 38% here within the actual companies. And we also have quite a high number of female-led companies. In fact, I think one of the companies here, Aztec, that's a female-led company as well. And no, it's just kind of it's good to see that. So I think the trend is starting to happen. This is definitely starting to happen. So yeah, that's what I'd share that with you.
That's great. It's just important to emphasize, and you've already done that, that female participation is not just your female FTEs. It's women at leadership level, which is the most important question. So AI startup, just based on everything you've heard right now, what do you think would be material for an AI startup to pay attention to? What should they prepare? And I gave you 3 little prompts here. Anybody from the online audience? Well, I think it is pretty obvious, and you've already mentioned it. I mean, they have huge carbon footprints. They need to make sure they have access to renewable energy supplies, which is not always obvious. Certainly not an island, because the infrastructure is missing. Climate risk. Well, I hope the new data centers took that into account, but I am not sure an island. Yeah, do they have a climate risk assessment? They haven't. Well, they might be in trouble. And then, obviously governance for any AI startup is hugely important around ethics. What is the purpose of that AI? What is the risk of misuse? You really have to think about those material questions.
In the model as well that they use, these large language models in terms of the actual data set that they use to train the AI as well. Just in terms of the social side of it as well, which you don't want bias creeping in as well. So that can impact on the actual AI that you're trying to develop in terms of when it's supplied as well. So there's some of the environmental constraints that you mentioned as well, but there's a lot of the social ones as well.
Yeah.
So that's something that, people need to take into account.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay, so I have some advice now on how you can start. So here's a little slide actually generated with AI of what you should not do. Yeah. Let's start with that. Yeah, and you can guess which picture is representing what action. So what is to avoid? Yeah. Don't let ESG just linger in the waiting room. Yeah. Not a good idea. Start today. You've had the opportunity of this free talk, get together today and take 3 actions. What can you do? Yeah. So delay, not an option. Don't politicize it. Yeah. I've seen that a lot. And that's another reason to just avoid the topic. Yeah. Oh no, it's woke or it's, I don't know what. The terminology ESG is really couldn't be more misleading. Yeah, but I mean ESG, it's just a framework. See it like that. Yeah, you are actually, if you're starting today, you're making sure that your business is future proof. That's another way of thinking about it. Yeah, don't recruit a summer intern. Yeah, not going to work. They might have some fun or not. Yeah, depending if they're taken seriously or not. But then, once the summer intern leaves, then what? And again, I've seen that time and time and time again. You need to take it on, not somebody else. And especially as a founder, you need to take this seriously. And then there's this one here, which my investor clients, they actually love because they understand that language. Yes, we're not some kind of green rebels. We're not environmentalists, but we do have fiduciary duty. And so do you towards your investors and shareholders. This is about fiduciary duty because it is about risk within financial impact and opportunity. Same thing. You will find it in your bottom line. So what can you do? Sustainability business strategy, again, might sound really daunting. I think I gave you a few hints today. Just one page. Yeah? Start with something. A one-page sustainability strategy for a startup is fine. At least you have something. Yeah? And then, as said, devise a 100-day action plan. What can you do for the first quarter of January of 2025? Take responsibility. You might be surprised. Some of your team members might actually be really keen on having a role in sustainability. It's very attractive, especially for their future CV. Make sure you have somebody on the board who is clearly accountable, not the whole board, one board member. And they just take it on and they learn on their way. You need to start collecting ESG data points, but remember, not just data points for the point of data collection. Those are your decision-making data points. It's very simple. So, and then just coming back to materiality. Materiality is all about common sense. Yeah. So if you're a startup and you devise a policy of we're going to have recycled, I don't know, forks for lunch, well, then you miss the point. Okay. Or we're going to have a recycling bin in our office. You'd be surprised at how many meetings with investment companies of the portfolios of the funds I work for. I hear these kind of things. Yes, we have policies and we've started to recycle our office waste. Okay, great. That's not it. So just use common sense. What is going to be most material to your business? And just use this as a guideline. Do no harm. Are you doing harm? Are you doing good? And where's the balance? And how can you make sure it is balanced? And then last but not least, try to make it fun. Normally, people engage with sustainability in a really easy way, and it is totally linked to innovation. That's a good way to go about it. And then just some concrete action points. So if you want to start with your carbon accounting, even if you just do scope 1 and 2, and you just want to have a look, how does this actually work? How complicated it is? Well, it's not. You'd be surprised. Yeah? So there is this SME Climate Hub, which is a brilliant free tool. Now, unfortunately, they're going to close it down on the 31st of January 2025, and that'll be part of normatives. I'm not sure yet about the pricing for startups, but I sincerely advise you use it until 31st of January. At least it gives you a real deadline. There's this Irish company called Cool Planet. They also do carbon accounting. If you want to stay within Ireland, some of you might know them already. And they're all pretty much the same, these tools, because they work with greenhouse gas accounting protocols. So they might have an interesting price for startups. And then I know that the Irish Venture Capital Association, they're working on some policy templates, which they hope to actually publish early next year. If you want to start with some very basic policies around, environment, diversity and inclusion and so forth, and you can use them. You don't have to start from scratch. So now we have a little bit of time for questions and answers. And I just love this image, nothing is not an option. You don't need to be perfect. Let's just start with something, because it'll make you so much more equipped for those first, or maybe you already have investor discussions, but you need to be seen, prepared and professional for these questions, because it's about your business. It's not about compliance. Okay, so with that, we come to questions and answers. I don't know if the audience the online audience have any questions, or if there's any questions here.
I got a text here, from an audience member, and they're wondering, is there any funding available for companies in this space?
I think Enterprise Island, they provide some funding for the device of a sustainability strategy. They have a list of recommended consultants, so that's definitely worthwhile looking up.
Hi, Martina. Shane Hannon here. Great presentation. Thanks so much. So my question is, in your opinion, do you envisage bioplastics becoming more mainstream to replace conventional plastic with respect to ESG in other areas than food and packaging? And then also, is there an appetite for major change at the EU or international level?
I'm not sure I heard the question clearly. So are you asking if it's going to become more mainstream for investors?
Yes.
Definitely. Yeah, I can see that happening. Yeah, so my assumption is that any venture capital, private equity investors, next year, they will send you an ESG questionnaire.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Nope, nothing else. You can find me on LinkedIn, so if you have any questions, if you're looking for any board members, I'm a woman, so just had to put that in there.
When do you see enforcement coming into place? You know, there's a lot of guidelines and there's lots of regulations, but is the enforcement, you know, taking place as well?
So
In terms of fines,
Yeah.
you know, you hear about spills, you hear about, you know, the nitrates directive. You know, there's lots of different types of regulatory guidelines, but you know, is the enforcement happening on the ground? Are the checks happening? And you know, are the penalties going into play? Because what I'm just listening to some of the audience members, it's like, you know, what do we need to do? What do we need to show on paper? What do we need to, you know, how can we defend our position? You know, so we don't get fined. But you know, it's kind of, you know, it's when the fines start kicking in, then that will maybe motivate people to actually, you know, address the issue. You know, is there a little bit of a people maybe taking a backseat approach where they're thinking, well, you know, there's no real kind of penalties involved, so we just continue the way we're going until, you know, this comes into place, because we're running a business and there's a lot of overheads, and you know, we're trying to focus in on our core business. You know, and there's that type of a mindset.
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering, you know, where are we in terms of enforcement?
So that's a very good question. So when it comes to compliance and fines for any European regulation, they're going to be very severe. Yeah, and I think they've already devised the type of fines. Now, implementation of fines is then up to every country. Yeah. So I know Ireland has been, I think, a bit of a laggard to enforce, you know, even environmental regulation. But I think that will change. But I might say that, you know, if businesses are working under the motivation of fines coming down the line, well, they are going to be the worst prepared, because, as we've said at the beginning, the environment is changing so fast. You know, consumer behavior is changing. You know, like we said, supply chains might be disrupted. So if you're not seeing this as a major business risk and you're only doing it to avoid a fine, well, then the best of luck to you in the future. You know, I always say, no nature, no business. If nature is going to collapse, then forget about your business, you know, whatever business you're in. But it will be applied, I'm pretty sure. That was why it was pushed back, because the European regulation on due diligence on supply chains, that was the big discussion.
We saw that with zootropic diseases like COVID. You know, supply chains around the world pretty much came to a standstill.
Yep.
It was a massive economic impact.
Massive.
I think we're still recovering from that.
Yep.
You know, so yeah, very interesting.
Is there any self-assessment questionnaires or anything to assess?
So I would recommend, if you want to start with something simple, then Invest Europe. the lowest disclosure level. That is an interesting one because it's really concrete and it will be adopted by a lot of investors. The other way you can go is the B Corp certification, not to actually obtain the certification, but they have a tool which is called the SDG Manager, which I think is brilliant. It's free and you can just assess where you are, and then it does give you action points. So I think that's a really good tool as well. Okay, so with that, I leave you.